I love on your website, and I've asked you over email about this before, but I'd like you to speak to the way Zu Audio, in my opinion, is quite OCD in the steps that you take to not just pair match your speakers, but as you told me, you match everything. So talk to me about how at Zu you match your speakers.
Yeah, it's a process, and it's part of process. So like we do this throughout our systems. So our systems are designed for pair matching. When we get a batch of inductors in, or capacitors, or wire to make cable out of, all that stuff is batched and noted for its batch. So like on cable, we take if we're making say if it's a B3 type, it's a type. If we're making a specific type of architecture in our cable line, then that's going to require eight wire circuits. And so we take these pre-batched wires that we get in from our vendors, and then we take those and we track how they are then go onto the cable machine, their positions, so that it all comes from the same batch. And then when those are cut for harnesses, those are also cut contiguously. So if we do a batch of 20 speakers, which is when we build stuff, typically 20 is about the batch size we build for a finished, for the lace-up process, which is the process where all these sub-assemblies come together in a final and they get laced up on a desk. Then they go into burn-in, final QC, packaged out the door. So at a 20 piece, all those 20 will have the same cable cut from the same end product of cable.
So this is referring to the cable and harness internally.
Yeah.
Is even matched from the same spool, essentially, of cable.
Yes. So it's really tough to tunnel. It's not tough. It's a bitch to tunnel in and measure all your batches and to get things to try to line up exactly. So your manufacturers on our wire, especially when Teflon was becoming, so Teflon has gone through a transformation in the United States. And during that time, different manufacturers were extruding the Teflon for various wire providers. So if you had a vendor who was drawing wire, that vendor would send it to various Teflon appliers to have that Teflon. And it would be different from batch to batch. So in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that kind of stuff was super stable. It's not as stable, and you don't have a lot of control over that big stuff for various reasons. But so we want to make sure that we have similar, as close to same sound as possible, because the best stereo comes out of matched systems. So
right.
And so all the capacitors, same. They come as a batch, but from the batch, then we individually go through, and we at the same time we measure the entire batch, note the entire batch without any so the temperature fluctuation, if we have any temperature deviation. So if we have a 2-degree temperature deviation, that batch is frozen. It's isolated.
I told you OCD.
Well, because you can see it in the measures.
Yeah.
So like when we do matching and batching of drivers, it basically it's typically James, but there's also Ann. There's others that also
to what
do this
tolerances?
process. Well, it depends. We grade everything. So there's pass-fail tolerances, which is a pretty tight tolerance. Pass-fail is close to but not over 1 dB deviation throughout all the parameters, and then it's averaged. And then when we match so that like the top match is like a 0.2 dB deviation, which is totally inaudible.
0.2 dB
average deviation.
Average deviation, yeah. And this is matching drivers.
Yes.
The primary driver and
yeah.
the tweeter.
And then on electrical parts, it's like.
Meaning the conductors and.
Yeah, well, conductors we treat. They're measured differently, but a capacitor or an inductor or a resistor, those are typically measured down to 0.1% deviation for a matched set, which is way overkill. But because we're on those, we match those at typically 250 units at a time. It's pretty easy to get some really high, tight tolerances because you have a pretty big batch. So you have a batch that pass fails. So you take the pass, you get rid of the outliers. We may do something with the outliers, but it's not going to be a production run.
Mm-hmm.
And then we take those, the 90% cream that remains, and then from that we get matches out of that have passed a certain window. So, and that but it pays off in when you're listening to stereo. It doesn't do a thing if you're listening to mono. All this OCD doesn't main hill of beans. So if I'm just listening to mono, or if I've got a bunch of loudspeakers and I'm doing a disco, it doesn't matter because the averages work out.
But in a stereo pair,
it matters.
Isn't it the imaging within the soundstage
Yeah,
that
for sure.
pays benefit to all of that OCD process to match your pairs?
Stereo is where it comes. That's where the rubber meets the road, is in your stereo. The stereophony, the imaging, the soundstage, whatever the term, it's all the same. Your ability to recreate a space and have it feel and sound compelling like you're in a three-dimensional field is necessary. That type of, because you've got 2 points recreating three-dimensional space. The tighter those match, the better the relationship in that space.
And what you're just describing is the kind of sound that we audiophiles are like searching for. That I love, this is what I want, but it's so overused, the holographic 3D soundstage that we all want, that we're all looking for, and then with very precise imaging within that holographic soundstage. We talk about that all the time. That's what we all want, and we get it to varying degrees depending on how we set it up and how much money we spend on our system. But everything that you're talking about in that process steps of pair matching pays benefits to us when we hear the sound in trying to create and get that holographic soundstage and imaging. And didn't you tell me also that even the MDF is matched and cut from the same batch of MDF for each set of speakers?
Yeah, so technically we don't match the MDF, but it is cut from the same plates. So if we get in, a batch, each plate is weighed, so we know where we're at, and then from that we can trust that the densities are the same, and if you get an orange mercury pair, they're going to be cut from the same sheet of MDF, or possibly that would be the probable. So 80% are actually the same sheet, but we get 5 of these guys from a single sheet of MDF without the bracing that goes in. So we have an oddball. So in that we would take the bunk of the sheets that we got in on a pallet. Those would be from the same batch, and we would consistently look. So when those hit the table, they're weighed. If they weigh the same, they would be then part of that batch. So we don't do too much in that way. That's just part of the process. And when it hits the table, it's weighed. You can see it, and it's correlated, and it's basically move forward. That's in that same batch. If there's an irregularity, that sheet's pulled.
See, this is the stuff that we take for granted, and it is invisible to us when we just pull our new speakers out of the box and set them up and listen, and we're hoping to hear this glorious sound. But I appreciate all of that detailed process and work that you do to get the matched pairs so that we get that sound benefit.
Sure.
Now let's see. Okay, let's talk about another thing that I think is special and I appreciate about ZU Audio is your approach to burn-in. And first of all, as we were talking previous about this, you mentioned that what do you consider the difference between burn-in and break-in?
Yeah, there's in my usage, I use the two interchangeably, talking just colloquially.
Mm-hmm.
Like at ZU, we don't differentiate it unless there's a reason to differentiate. Burn-in is typically the electrical domain. So if it's capacitor, if it's a voice coil's electrical properties, if it's a cable, which is almost exclusively in the electrical domain, that's all burn-in. And then stuff that happens in the mechanical, which is the membrane or the cone, surround behavior, the spider underneath.
That's break-in,
yeah,
and the electrical is burn-in.
Yeah,
okay.
So I use the two kind of interchangeably, but there is a difference technically, at least in our usage over at ZU.
Interesting when you differentiated for me, so I appreciate that. So tell me about why you at ZU deliver to us speakers that are already burned in, which I really appreciate. I like that I can just put them on, no excuses, they're going to sound the way they should sound, and how there's a slight deviation now in your burn-in, how you're doing with the method bookshelves.
Yeah, sure. High efficiency speakers have a different dynamic behavior, and to get there requires different type of engineering than a lower efficiency. Plastic cones don't break in. So also low efficiency is kind of like stepping out with not a magnifying glass. It's more of a big overview picture. So when you use high efficiency and the required materials and engineering to get there, you are putting magnifying glass on differences in different performance characteristics of, say, playback. So it becomes, so as you get more efficient, you get problems become bigger. Maybe good things become bigger too, but it's easier to hear problems. I think that's most people's, you key in on problems first, mm-hmm. as listeners. So anyway, doing the whole process of development in high efficiency, which I had as a kid, I played in mostly high efficiency. There was a decade there where I also played around with low efficiency stuff because it was easy to get the ruler flat magnitude response measure, but that's a different story. So I'm playing around with all this high efficiency stuff, and it's changing over time, and this is something that I'm aware of, and no big deal, I'll just burn it in, which means I'm going to pound the shit out of it I'm going to put it on a big amp, and I'm going to go for it, maybe use it for a couple shows.
At high SPL dB.
Crazy high level. So near soak levels, which is a point of destruction, to really close, just barely riding that envelope of deforming for life.
We don't want to be anywhere near.
Right. and so that's how I did it. And I'm semi self-absorbed, to be honest. And so I just figure everybody's just like me. They have big amplifiers, they beat on stuff, and about 2007, 2008, I get a call from a really cool, famous tube engineer, retailer, designer, Don Garber, Phi Electronics. Makes and have maybe made the best looking vacuum tube amps ever, and they were always low power, so he was really into 45s and 2A3s,
like 2 watts, 3 watts,
2 watts, 3 watts, 4 watts, maybe 6 watts. I don't think he got anything bigger than a 2A3, not for sure there. Mm-hmm. That would be a question for like Herb Reichert, who he played in that world and glass audio and did some really cool stuff there. I kind of missed that with my age, and I wasn't on the East Coast, so I missed a lot of cool stuff that happened out in the New York area. But anyway, so Don calls me, hey, 101 dB efficient. This speaker looks super cool. I love the look. I want to buy a pair. Great.
This was
2007, 2008, somewhere in there. Could have been 2006.
Yeah.
But somewhere in that window. We build a pair. We didn't burn anything in because, again, everybody's just like me in my brain. So we send him a pair. And he gets them, and I don't hear back. And I don't typically reach out to customers, even industry people. I just, just let them make their own decision, draw their own conclusion. And 6 months goes by, I get a call. It's Don. Hey, Sean, maybe these are broken. Maybe they just aren't right. I don't know. I don't think they're working right. They don't really do it for me. Oh, no problem, Don. Hey, here's a return. No problem. It's personal taste. Maybe they're not. We get them back. I hook them up. I'm interested, and they sound brand new still. I'm like, wow, Hey Don, did you play these? Yeah, I tried these. I played them for a couple hours every day, just to see. Well, what did you play them with? Oh, low power stuff. And he's in an apartment in New York, and so like his idea aloud is maybe 70 dB SPL at the listening chair. And that's when the light bulb went off for me. Oh, people aren't like me. Well, and then also my partner Adam DeCaria, he helped start ZU. He had to sit me down one time about the same time. Hey, Sean, people are not like you with the different face. They're actually different than you. So I learned my lesson, and we started burning stuff in. And when we started burning it in, I burned it in as if I wanted it burned in. So we developed a pretty elaborate burn-in process. Currently, we can burn in about 40 pair of speakers. We have a bunch of big high-power pro audio, a rack of about 180 amps on 3 phases in our shop. It's serious. Our electrical bill reflects how serious our burn-in is. It's not like we plug this into a wall outlet. These are, direct to the circuit breaker in our shop.
So when ZU started as a company, you did not sell your speakers burnt in?
No, we might have put an evening on them just to beat on them for a minute, test them, make sure they weren't going to blow up, and send it out. Because if somebody gives me money for an order, the last thing I want to say is, hey, it's going to be 6 weeks of burn-in, because they're going to say, well, you're unknown, sorry, and that's too long, I'm not going to wait. So back then we were just sending them, order would come in, we would send it out there.
And that was for a number of years that you didn't do burn-in?
Yeah, the first 8 years of ZU's life, we did not do burn-in.
And then once you started doing burn-in after that experience, how did that impact your return rate?
So during those 8 years, we were all working second jobs. In fact, we all had jobs except for one, Marty. Marty was full-time at the shop, and he was making everything and picking up the phone. We got 50% of what we sold back on loudspeakers during those first 8 years, roughly 50%. We started doing burn-in, and it depends a little bit on, but overall, it's about 4% return on our stuff now.
Since you started doing burn-in.
Yeah.
I think that's a fascinating stat because, look, you may or may not be aware of all of us in this community, how we talk and things that get flame warred and people have religious beliefs on, etc. But burn-in is one that some people believe in and some people believe is snake oil. But that fact of the impact that it had on reducing your return rate, I personally, I can't A/B, test, but I like that when I get a speaker delivered from you, I put in, there's no excuse, oh, well, play it for 100 hours, it's going to change, it's like, no, it's going to sound when I set it up. I have to get my positioning and my setup right, but I know you have delivered in a way that it's going to sound the way you intend it to sound. And as a consumer, I appreciate that.
But I should back up a little bit. So there's a couple of other variables in that. So like our return rate for products that are traditional for us, it's like 4%. But yeah, the Soul Supreme or the Soul Superfly, I don't know if it's in the camera view. There's a pair here. They're my favorite speaker that we make.
This is the Soul 6?
Soul 6, right? It's killer. And we knew it required more burn-in. So on the Soul 6, we were putting a lot more burn-in, 600 hours of burn-in. And we were, again, 600 hours is a long time for and we play 24/7, but it really doesn't get lit up until we all go home. Then that's when all hell breaks loose. During the day, they're only getting maybe a watt to each speaker in that. It's still pretty loud, censor, but it's not insane. And we don't all have to wear muffs over at the other building. So the Soul 6, at first we were getting about 40% of those back, even with an excruciating amount of burn-in. And now we put more on them. And on some of the stuff that is, so the Soul 6, it's different that it's got a really small voice coil. It's hard for us to really pound on it. We still put crazy amount of power in, but the diaphragm that we do on that, the nanotubes, they don't shear in the same way. The binders don't shear in the same way that our 260 driver, which is a mellower driver. So the stuff that we use on the Dirty Weekend series and the driver, the magnet structure that we have on this, it's not dumbed down. It's just not taken quite as to the edge of high efficiency performance like it is on the Soul 6. So again, the burn-in phenomenon for us is pretty real, and we can see it.
Yeah.
Soul 6 is gorgeous. It's not expensive. It's not heavy. It's easy to work with. But yet, and people wanted, so our reputation would precede us. So you'd think, oh, everything's going for us. But yet, 40% of the people were still sending that back for the first year of that product's life.
So that's interesting.